this edition of Dr. Clark's One-on-One, the Living Pastor. Today we're talking politics 101 with my good friend and colleague, Professor George Amity. And Professor Amity, greetings and welcome, my friend. How you doing?
Greetings. Good to be here.
Yes, indeed. And I got to say it to you one more time. Congratulate you on your retirement. I mean, it's still fresh to me. I know it. How does it feel to you?
I'm still getting adjusted. I'm losing track of the days, but that's a good feeling.
Well, individuals tell me all the time that they do more in retirement sometimes than they do when they were working. They have to find so many things because people think you're free all the time, so they're always calling you to do this and do that and all these other et ceteras.
Well, I've gotten so many calls, and I'm trying to push back at least for a little while so I can enjoy retirement for a few weeks, a few months.
Yes, and let's talk some federal, state, and local politics. In particular, let's talk about. Let's start off with what we on the national phase and look at this administration. And it seems as though that when we look at this particular administration, when we go outside the boundaries of the boundaries of the United States, there seems to be a new configuration of the international world order which is taking place. And we got to understand, see what this configuration is all about. We know that the People's Republic of China, in China, we find that they've had a massive showing of their armaments, a military parade, and in that parade, they had, at the parade, they had leaders they had leaders from North Korea, leaders from the leader from Russia, and previous to the parade, they had leaders that was in town from the biggest democracy in the world, largest democracy in the world, India, and then a host of other countries. What does this realignment or so-called realignment or this visual symbolic display say to the Western world, in particular the United States?
Well, we know that this administration is short on people with the expertise to carry on true diplomacy. What we see sometimes is threats, bullying, and the like. And so, I attributed to the brain drain that occurred in the State Department when this administration, by putting people in positions who don't know how to conduct foreign policy and international relations. I also believe that our strategy was to isolate certain countries. And it seems as though now those countries that didn't get along with one another, like, for example, China and India for a long while, or even
Yes.
Russia and China had different approaches. And so now they've formed an organization specifically for the purpose of counting the U.S. Posture in isolating so many countries.
The Americans will look at this as being an unholy alliance, but the alliance seems to be there because it's brought in a Western democracy, brought in India into the alliance.
Absolutely.
And so that coupled with America and this administration, the current administration, and its view toward tariffs, having high tariffs not only on adversaries but also on your allies, such as Canada, Mexico, Western Europe. How does that play into this? Because I have my view. How does that play into this?
Well,
Yes, sir.
from the standpoint of the theory of countervailing powers,
Yes, sir.
You have a group that is forming to counter Donald Trump, who pretty much has alienated almost every country. The only nation I think that we're have not alienated is Israel. But if you look at even our so-called allies in Europe, we've isolated them. The continent of Africa, we see nations in the continent of Africa pulling away from the United States. So he has, in essence, created a system where we appear to be isolated by the most populous and influential nations in the world.
And this is self-inflicted because and I know terrorists themselves countries would view terrorists as a prelude to war. It's an active war in some cases, high terrorists in particular.
Absolutely.
And so let's look at this. Also, I want to turn the conversation to some extent and talk about this administration, the Trump administration, and something that I know that is important to our listeners and viewers, and that is the nature of this administration sending troops into we understand the District of Columbia, and then threatening to send a National Guard into other cities in the United States, cities which happen to be headed by Democrats and also headed by people of color, such as Chicago, Los Angeles, and other cities that with New York City. Yes, sir.
Well, that's very interesting because we've often warned on this program the shift towards authoritarianism and the shift towards fascism. And we see it being played out in a gradual kind of fashion. With respect to the occupation of the District of Columbia, which we know is Chocolate City.
Yes,
and
Parliament.
This is clearly an attempt to use two issues. One, the crime issue, and secondly, the immigration issue to justify sending in the National Guard to the District of Columbia. With respect to the District of Columbia, we know that they've always been a move towards D.C. statehood, because when you look at the U.S. Constitution makes no provisions for local government. The power of local governments is by enabling legislation from the state. In this particular case, the District of Columbia is not a state. So therefore, it comes under the jurisdiction of the federal government, and Trump has exploited this weakness in our Constitution.
Yes, understanding that they do have taxation
without representation.
Without representation, yes. And so, and it's going to be interesting to see how the various states handle this threats of nationalization and having a national police force come into their communities, into their states, and into their cities. Yes.
Well, unlike the District of Columbia, the other cities, Los Angeles, Chicago, Baltimore, they are governments of the states, and the states do have power, and there are certain powers that the states have that the national government cannot infringe upon. According to the 10th Amendment, the states are controlled of health, safety, and welfare. So policing is a state function. However, once again, Trump is signing executive orders, and by virtue of executive orders, he's ignoring the legalities of many of these things, and it's going to be up to the courts. And we've already seen the pushback on the federal courts with respect to sending troops to Los Angeles. So it's obviously the Congress is not going to do anything because it's controlled by his party. But the problem with the courts is the timing it takes to respond, and he takes advantage of the law and that it takes to get a interpretation constitutional.
Yes, and forward-thinking judges like to protect themselves in terms of to protect themselves from higher courts would say, we give you 30 days to give a response.
Exactly.
And of course, we know a lot of damage can be done in 30 days. In my view, it seems like this administration operates with a lot of bravado. It really operates more for stage presentation, bravado, and the way it works is that it's almost like a WWF, sort of.
Right.
all of the leadership and administrators, they talk as though they've gone to WWF presentations and rehearsals and come out learning how to speak with bravado. And individuals recognize that it's false bravado because they choose and pick on the individuals who are the least in our community.
Yeah.
And yes, sir.
Well, the difference between the WWF and this is the actions of this president has had real consequences. Let's just go down the line. with CDC, the
Yeah.
resignation of the director of the CDC because they won't pay attention to science, or the Secretary of Health and Human Services is operating on a conspiracy theory. We've seen the thing with the Bureau of Labor Statistics,
Yes.
the firing of
absolutely.
that person. Science, facts, truth has nothing to do with the agenda that this president wants. We've seen the same thing with the Federal Reserve, where
With
trying to take I like the idea
Lisa
that
Cook,
is
yes.
drama,
Yeah.
but the drama in this case has very, very adverse circumstances. It's not staged; it's real.
And it's designed to accumulate power in the hands of one individual. But what's going to happen is this: is that even in this designation and in the way this is designed, that when this leadership is out the picture and gone, and a Democrat takes in and takes hold, you're going to discover that that particular leader is going to have a lot of power,
Yeah.
a lot of influence
Because of Trump.
because the way everything is structured, when a new Democrat comes in, and that will happen, or even a forward-thinking Republican comes in, because if they're not all swept out of office, but when a new leader comes in, that particular leadership is going to have an awful lot of power as a result of the Trumpian.
Well, I agree to some extent,
Okay.
but many people are saying this is the last election. This is the last president that the American people is going to elect. And if there is an election, you're not going to be able to trust the election because of this president doing things like eliminating mail-in voting and doing all the gerrymandering that he's orchestrating. So I didn't believe that hype, but we see they're doing everything to prevent this foreseen takeover by the Democratic Party.
In my presentation, that we've gone through this before in American society, and that his idol is, this president's idol is William McKinley. And you remember, William McKinley was the one who was assassinated under his president. Yeah,
Hey,
so
Doc.
you got to be careful of who
That's
your
true.
idols are.
That's true.
And so because sometimes you want to live like your idol.
Absolutely.
And work like your idol. He was a leader that engaged in tariffs and all these sort of things, and it was the same sort of thing that took place in American society.
Right.
And so we have to understand that recognizing the nature of this, that's my presentation, is that no matter what may happen, you're not larger than America.
Right.
And
Right.
we have seen this before. We've seen this page before. In fact, we saw it on the other side of the equation when Franklin Roosevelt came into power. He was elected for 4 terms.
Right.
And
Exactly.
he was called a king, a dictator, and all these other.
That's
etc.
right.
And the ones to the right of him hated him, despised him. He was dragged through the fire and all of that. But what happened is that eventually America evolved into the America that was necessary, and we've seen individuals who have attacked black people in mass.
Absolutely.
And my presentation is that we've seen it. I know in my lifetime, I've seen tougher black people. When you look at individuals who are protagonists toward Black America, when you look at the George Wallaces and the John Merricks and the Bull Connors of America, he's nothing compared to them.
Yeah, I agree. And
Nothing, yes.
but we have a long way to go to get there.
Precisely.
Because of the fact that we have every branch of government controlled by one party, and that's scary.
And it is scary. And I would also make the presentation that government hasn't always been a friend of Black America. The presidents has not. We have had presidents who were completely anti-Black, and we've had Congresses that were never friendly to Black America. It was only and of course the judiciary has recently been friendly toward Black to some extent, and the way they acted toward Blacks is always in terms of some sort of incrementalism. Plessy versus Ferguson, excuse me, and Brown versus Board of Education. This whole incremental approach toward bringing Blacks into the fold. But let's move forward. Is this nothing more than something to confuse the public with respect to the Einstein files?
Well, it's it's real.
It's real.
They're
On
real.
one hand,
They're real victims,
yes.
and there seem the extent, and those folk have organized themselves in order to counter. But there's a larger question, I think, and I go back to Watergate. No,
All right.
no, Nixon didn't orchestrate the breaking of Watergate. What brought him down was the cover up. And so I think in this particular case, even though perhaps the Epstein files are not as damaging as they could be, or they might be as damaging, the very fact that there's a lack of transparency and a cover up, it's like a cancer. It could explode.
And that's his base. His base is really
his
concerned
base-
about the cover up because
Absolutely.
they're the ones that were motivated to get him to get this president elected.
That's right. That's right. So that I think it's serious. I think it also could do some serious damage uh, to this president and to his administration.
Does he have a chance to recover?
Well,
From much of the damage that's taking place, can he recover can he recover and can America recover? Yes.
well, he can recover, but I don't think it's going away, and I think he's going to eventually have to make the files available, and that's the only way it's going to go away.
And I would argue that yes, what is out there that we don't really pay attention to always is that there are events which you cannot control, and with so many adversaries out there in America, out there in the world, which are adversarial toward the American experience, that you don't know where America may find itself. Because I would suggest that the one thing he cannot do is send troops abroad, because then he will lose another brick in his in his support.
Well,
in his base,
yeah, but he can employ drone warfare to I think what we've shown both what happened in Iran and what just recently happened with the drone attack of the drug cartel is that no, our approach to war is technology based.
Now, and in terms of international law, to attack a ship at sea and say that and to say that they were a cartel bringing drugs to the United States, where is their protection coming from Venezuela? Well, what is the Venezuelan response to that, or what are their people's response to that?
Yeah, well,
We can only accept the word of this administration. Yes,
exactly. But this is nothing new because George W. Bush,
yeah,
engaged in preemption.
Yeah, that was
if I think you're
was his
about
doctrine.
if I think you're about to harm me, that's justification for me to go ahead and take you out. And to some extent, President Obama carried on that to a little while. Eventually, it was a citizen who was with Yemen or whatever, saying, well, that's a citizen. He has certain rights. So I just think that, he's going to utilize that, and they're just continuing the policy of preemption.
And which is true. There's an old text, remember, by Kegley and Wetclough on American foreign policy, that there's pattern and continuity in American foreign policy, regardless of who the president may be.
That's right.
Yes, indeed. And let's turn the conversation again in the remaining minutes that we do have. Talk about some state and local issues that exist. We're in the middle of state and local elections, but since you and I last met, what is really big has been the indictment of current mayor LaToya Cantrell. And how does that, as a political scientist, how does that reside with you?
Well, I was out of town when that was released, and I still can't wrap my head around all of the particulars. I know what the accusations are, but some of it sound like a narrative that someone's putting together. But I don't know, and I think everybody's innocent until proven guilty. But I do take away 2 points. First, what gives me pause is this Justice Department. We're not under a Biden Justice Department. We're not under a Bush Justice Department. We're not under a Obama Justice Department. We're under a Donald Trump U.S. Attorney and Justice Department. For that reason, I know, we always view the Justice Department and the Attorney General's office as being so quasi independent from the influence of politics. That's not the case with this administration. This administration uses the Justice Department to sick on his adversaries and people who he perceives at harm him.
Retribution.
Retribution. The second thing that gives me pause, and like I say, I don't know, it remains to be seen whether or not the narrative that they've painted will come true. The second thing, more importantly, that gives me pause is the timing relative to the mayoral elections. I think the timing of the release of the indictments has some political implications. I say that because what I believe it does, and you've seen it to some extent, that the idea is to really put this mayor in a certain box, and then in the campaign you'll see certain camps associating the other prominent candidates with this mayor, and we've seen some of that already.
Okay.
So the idea is, to me, I don't know whether the charges are true or false, but I do know that the strategy is to have this come out before the election in order to poison the water with respect to the viable candidates.
And the viable candidates, how do you see the viable candidates now at the top of the pyramid?
Well, it's still, we know that
Moreno,
Judge Arthur Hunter
yes,
stepped out of the race, and so now you still have the top three of Helena Moreno, Councilman Thomas, and also Royce Duplessis,
state senator. Yes.
Now, my position has always been the most important time in an election is 4 weeks before the election, and the most important day is the day of the election. So from my perspective, even with the council races, I'm not going to predict. I will say again, irregardless of what the polls are saying, I do believe there will be a runoff. And then if a runoff occurs, then you'll have a real election between two candidates.
Well, let's say that I've seen various polls that indicate that one candidate that Moreno's at the top of the pyramid in the polling, and that perhaps either that Royce Duplessis would run a good race against her, and some polls have indicated that Oliver Thomas would run a better race. But let's just see how this plays out, because there are those, and then other polls have inverted that. So my thinking is that black candidate in that race can seriously win the race, hands down. But the black candidate has to have that ability to go out and get the polling to get the people out to vote. GOTV. It is indeed the African American candidates to lose, regardless what the polls say.
I agree, because two things has to happen.
Yes,
well,
sir.
I always say day of the election, because that's where you're going to pull out your vote. You got to know where your vote is, and you have to pull it out and make sure it's there to support you. But I do think that there's an advantage with the money and with the media with respect to Helena Moreno, but there's an inverse relationship between money and media and foot soldiers and the excitement that a candidate can give to the public. I also believe that there has to be some efforts to I hate to say it, draw some dirt or reveal what records that each person has taken positions on that will affect the election.
Well, what role do you see ethnicity and gender playing in the race? ethnicity in terms of Latino American, African American, and gender, male versus female. What role do you see playing?
Well,
in that? Because I think it's significant personally.
it plays a very
and
large
professional, yeah.
role, even though we hear everyone saying, you know, it's almost like talking about race and ethnicity is promoted as being taboo. But from a social science perspective, as a unit of analysis, race and ethnicity is the most significant unit of analysis.
It is a requirement.
You'll be informed.
It's a requirement.
You'll be more informed about what's going on in a particular race when you use the unit of analysis as race and ethnicity. So it's really insane to talk about, I'm not, well, I go back to once again what I said about Nixon. I will not make race an issue in this campaign. By virtue of you saying you're not making race an issue, guess what you've just done? You've made race an issue. So it's in ethnicity. You're not going to be able to avoid it. And we see that out in New Orleans East. We have Jason Hughes and Cindy Nguyen both running, and the significant Vietnamese American population. And the census has said that we have more Latinos, and so it, but will that make a difference? Will depend on turnout, who comes out.
Precisely. And again, in the minute that we do have remaining, any concluding statements and something we need to be aware of before we come back again in 30 days? Yes, sir.
Well, I think two things. One, are troops coming to New Orleans? And what is the position of the mayoral candidates? They're quiet as church mouses. So I want to know, because, you got the man, our governor is Mega 2.0. So they're saying, troops are not just coming to Chicago, but Baltimore. What are the mayor or candidates? I know everyone's trying to get along with the governor, say that they're better able to work with the governor. But this means that you've adopted a MAGA position. And in my estimation, what is your position about the possibility? Also, the courts.
Yes, sir.
I think the courts are very important, particularly the federal courts. Of course, the Supreme Court is definitely important. So what will happen in terms of some of these moves that the president is making that are adversely affecting the city of New Orleans and that are supported by this governor? What are the responses that locally that we have to that?
Well, I want to thank you for joining me. It's always great when you come in. Is the best ever out of the 30 minutes that we do have. And again, this is Dr. Clark's 101, The Living Classrooms. We talk politics 101 with my good friend and colleague, Professor George Amedee Sr. And you can follow on all platforms of social media. And as always, it's been a pleasure.